We'll start our garden tour with a visit to Susan and Bill Teefy's garden in Castro Valley. It was designed by Michael Filgen from 4 Dimensions Landscape. And this is the Teefy garden before. Inspired by gardens that they saw on the Bringing Back the Natives garden tour, Susan and Bill decided to save water, create habitat for wildlife, and plant natives. And this is garden was transformed in 2016, and EBMA's lawn conversion rebate program helped pay for this transformation. And I love how the plants softened the lines of this retaining wall, which was already in place when the garden was redone. This garden has multiple seating areas. And now that the garden has been established, the drip system has been shut off and only plants that need it are watered by hand. Woodpeckers, nuthatches, chickadees, and spotted towhees have all nested in this garden. So let's go now and meet Susan Teefy. Is Susan with us? Hi, Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan, and we're here in Castro Valley in our mostly California native garden. We've been here over 30 years, and the yard's gone through quite some significant changes in that time. The property's on a hillside, so shortly after we moved in, we flattened out as much as we could, and we put in some retaining walls, we put in a lawn, and we created a walking path around the outside with narrow planting areas along the fences. And that worked out really well, especially when the kids were small. We played a lot of games on that lawn and had Easter egg hunts and bouncy houses out there. I did spend a lot of time mowing the lawn. As we know in California, drought's a way of life, and it didn't take long to realize that low water use plants are a good idea. I bought this book from East Bay Mud about using water conserving plants, and I used it as a guide. It had some California natives, but not too many. It's come a long way since that time, since that first edition, and it now includes a lot more California natives. Mine's pretty dog-eared and marked up. But once the kids were grown, we decided to get rid of the lawn and transition to a more bird-friendly yard. I really like to photograph birds, and I love the idea of bringing more birds into the yard. I had gone on the Bringing Back the Natives garden tour, and I was really inspired by the beautiful native plant gardens that I saw. So we hired the wonderful team at 4 Dimensions to help us develop a plan and carry it out. We took advantage of East Bay Mud's lawn conversion rebate program, and so for about 2.5 years after we did it, we didn't pay a water bill. So they also have a super rebate program if you plant mostly California natives. We had one significant native plant we really wanted to keep, and that was a coast redwood tree that was only about 6 feet tall when we moved in. It's probably 35 or 40 feet tall by now. It should live 2,000 years and get about 300 feet tall. We planted another one on the other side of the yard, and it's about 20 feet tall today. There are quite a few redwoods in the neighborhood. Historically, this area was full of them. And a lot of them in the neighborhood are really tall, and they often have nests of larger birds like crows, Cooper's hawks, red-shouldered hawks, and white-tailed kites. In our yard, we mostly host hummingbirds. We did put up an owl box, but we haven't had any owls yet. And there was another tree I really wanted to keep, and that was an old apricot tree. It was pretty much dead, but it hadn't fallen over yet. A Nuttall's woodpecker had made a cavity nest in there. And it turns out that several other local bird species use old woodpecker holes for their nests. After the woodpeckers left, we had Bewick's wrens nesting in there, and then nuthatches, and oak titmice, and then finally the old tree fell over. So if you have an old tree that's dying, it's totally worth it to leave as much of the trunk for habitat if you can do that safely. After the apricot tree fell down, we put up nest boxes. We used the instructions we found on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website, and they worked out really well. These boxes mimic the cavity nests that these birds would find in the wild. And the website has tips about the size of the holes to exclude unwanted species like house sparrows, and other tips about how to keep them safe from predators. The chestnut-backed chickadees especially like them, and they fill them up with shredded redwood bark, which matches the color of their backs. So the hillside's a bit of a challenge. We were always fighting the slope when we had a lawn. Now we've got 3 flat areas on different levels, each one with its own patio. The upper 2 patios are flagstone, connected by these wonderful natural stone steps. We have a big table and chairs in the middle under a redwood arbor, and we eat outside here a lot in the summertime. The yard's kind of an extension of the house. It's like having an extra room in the warmer months. The upper patio's a little smaller, and it has a nice bench and some pots on it. There's still a pathway around the outside, but it's a bit closer in, so the planting area is larger. And we have a couple of sets of stairs topped with the same flagstone in places where it's really too steep. So it kind of divides the yard into 6 or 7 separate areas. One of my favorite areas is the hammock. We've got a post to hold up one end, and the other end is held up by a tree. It's a great place to take a nap in the summertime. And I've got a lot of heucheras along one side, and they smell really nice. We have an irrigation system. It's a drip line with built-in emitters, and it's underneath the mulch and operated by a timer. The yard's divided into 6 different zones, and each one can be set independently. But it's turned off most of the time. I find that I just hand water new plants or supplement the water every 2 or 3 weeks if I need to, if it's a particularly dry summertime with the hose, and that seems to be sufficient. The mulch seems to keep the water in pretty well. The pathways are made of stabilized, decomposed granite, and these are really porous, which is awesome. We had a ton of rain this year, and it goes right through them. They actually grow moss along the edges, which makes them look even more like a dirt trail that you'd see out in the East Bay parks. The only problem is they're a little slippery when it's wet. We have a lot of mulch, mostly wood chips and fallen leaves. The mulch is really helpful in keeping the weeds down, and the weeds that do grow are pretty easy to pull out. And the mulch slows down the water quite a lot when it rains and keeps it from running off too fast. I try to avoid moving it around too much. There's a lot of bugs living under there. And every now and then I need to rake the mulch back uphill after it's shifted, and it can overwhelm small plants, and I need to kind of move it around and push it aside. Recently, I invested in an electric chipper shredder. I spend a lot of time trimming tree branches and shrub branches and filling up my green waste bin. Plus the redwood tree and the larger deciduous trees drop a lot of sticks and branches when it's windy. I thought it would be better to make my own mulch from the tree trimmings, and it works really great. Once the chips are made, it's pretty easy to spread them around the yard to supplement the mulch. The only problem with the mulch is that the ground-dwelling birds, like the towhees and the sparrows, kick it onto the path all the time. I could sweep these paths every day, and the birds would just kick the mulch right back onto the path. Towhees seem to have a thing about tidy gardens. They really don't like things to be tidy. It's important to have fresh moving water, both for the birds and for other wildlife. We've got a small pond with a recirculating waterfall, and there are lots of birds that come to drink and bathe there. It's made of resin. It's really lightweight. It's important to be able to completely empty it out on a regular basis and scrub it and refill it with fresh, clean water. And as a bonus, we've got arboreal salamanders and slender salamanders living underneath it. But the best part about having the fountain is the opportunity to take photos of birds from the comfort of my kitchen. I've tied up some bare branches as perching sticks, and the birds will usually land there for a moment before they come into the water, and this makes for great photo opportunities. As the garden's gotten older, we've had a few new species show up. We always get the regulars, the house finches, purple finches, chickadees, nuthatches, titmice, woodpeckers, scrub jays, and mockingbirds. But now we're getting orioles and tanagers and Wilsons, Townsends, yellow-rumped, and even Nashville warblers, which is super cool. I put up a hummingbird feeder, and if you've ever left anything with sugar in it outside, you know it attracts ants. And the perfect fix is an ant moat, an ingenious invention. The only problem with ant moats is that the small birds find them irresistible, so you might have to refill them more often than you would expect just due to evaporation. We get quite a few different kinds of bees. There are the European honeybees, of course, but we also get several kinds of native bees. Most of these are solitary and they live underground part of the year. The easiest ones to recognize are the yellow-faced bumblebees, which have these yellow bands around their backs and abdomens. And then there's the enormous valley carpenter bee, which is shiny black, and they don't sting. We get a lot of butterflies and other types of flying insects around the flowers too. And then there's a short period of time, usually in November or December, when the ground is just starting to get soaked, that we get a lot of mushrooms too. Even before we planted natives, we had house finches nesting under the eaves every year, and we didn't want to do anything to discourage them. House finches are one of the few species that feed their babies mostly regurgitated seeds. Most other birds need bugs for their babies. Even birds like brown-headed cowbirds, who lay their eggs in other birds' nests, need bugs as they're growing up. And it turns out that cowbirds don't do very well in finch nests for that reason. It's really important that nesting birds have access to a lot of bugs to feed their babies. A lot of birds switch to eating seeds as they get older, but they need that extra nutrition from things like caterpillars to raise their young. We sit outside in the summertime and watch them bring back more and more bugs to their nests, and it's amazing how many bugs they can catch. There are several larger shrubs that provide structure around the garden. And these are solid, fairly dense shrubs that provide kind of a framework for the rest of the garden, and then the rest of the stuff fits in around them. Coffeeberry is an evergreen shrub that I love. We've got 3 of those. These are wonderfully full, they're always green, and they look great all year. They grow berries that start out red, and then they gradually turn purple and then almost black, and the birds love them. The ones we have are about 6 years old now, and they only get to be maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. I don't do anything with them. I don't prune them or fertilize them or anything. The Buick's wrens are often hopping around underneath them. I have trouble getting photos of the berries because they don't last very long. The birds eat them pretty fast. Toyon also grows berries, and birds love those too. I've got 3 toyon, and they're slowly filling in the spots that they're in. The branches are kind of thin, and so when they're really full of berries, they sort of droop down, and hermit thrushes will jump up from the ground and pick a couple and then fall back down to the ground. It's pretty entertaining to watch them. The waxwings are much more graceful in their berry eating habits. I do have to tie the toyon up. They will kind of slope downhill if I don't do that. And I've seen them cut back fairly severely, but I haven't cut mine at all. They seem to do fine with a good bit of pruning. Another great shrub is the Ribes aureum, and I've got 3 of these too. They're deciduous. They lose all their leaves in the winter. In about February, these Ribes grow a lot of small yellow flowers, and then they fill in with these light green leaves. They've got long arching branches that are kind of wispy if you let them grow. I keep the ones near the walkways trimmed back so they don't smack people when they're walking by, but otherwise I let them go. Then there's Muhlenbergia, which is deer grass. It's a really cool shape, pretty different from everything else in the garden. It starts out really green, and then they slowly turn golden by the end of the summer. By late summer, they grow these crazy spikes that can get to be about 4 or 5 feet tall. You can leave them as they are, or you can trim them back nearly to the ground every 2 or 3 years so they don't look so much like a haystack, and they come back nice and green the next winter and into the spring. Ceanothus is another wonderful plant. These are evergreen too. I've got 3 of the Julia Phelps variety. They get to be about 6 feet tall and about the same width. This is a really popular native plant. It's really easy to find in most nurseries. For a couple of weeks in the spring, they are just beautiful with their deep purple flowers, and they are a magnet for bees and other pollinators. Once their flowers are gone in late spring, they stay pretty dark green, and they make a really nice backdrop for other flowers. And the birds love to hide in there. Last year, the bush tits made a nest in there. It's kind of a woven basket that hangs down from a branch. I've got another one called Skylark that's really pretty too. It blooms in the spring and then again in the fall if it's happy. It's a lot shorter than the Julia Phelps variety. It's about 3 to 4 feet tall. And then I've got some low ground cover types. This one's called Yankee Point. It does really well, spilling over the top of walls and filling in spaces. It's supposed to be one of the most garden-friendly California lilacs. I've got 4 or 5 different kinds of manzanita. These Big Sur variety are my favorite. They've filled in this area along the front of the retaining wall, and they're a nice dark green all year. They're fairly dense, and not too many weeds grow up through them, and they have these tiny urn-shaped flowers that pollinators love. They provide really good cover for bluebellies and occasional alligator lizards. I don't do much with them, just trim them occasionally. And I've got another variety called Pacific Mist, which is also a ground cover and super easy to grow. It takes pruning really well, and it fills in the area alongside the steps or over a wall. Although I got rid of most of the old lawn, I do still have a small meadow in the front yard. This is seashore bent grass, also called thin grass, Agrostis pallens. It takes a surprising amount of work to keep it looking like a lawn. I rake it and mow it an embarrassingly large number of times, and I reseed it every few years. But this is the only part of the yard where I regularly see bluebirds and phoebes and flycatchers who seem to like a little more open space. We've had Pacific slope flycatchers nesting on the front porch a few times, and I see them flycatching over the meadow, so it's totally worth it. I love California poppies. They're just spectacular. Nothing can compare to that bright orange. The poppies will reseed, and if they're in a spot where they have some room, I leave them alone or dig them up and replant them in other open areas to spread them around. I've got several beautiful flowering perennials, like the iris, epilobium, buckwheat, penstemon, gambelia. And I like to add a variety of annuals in the spring, like tarweed, which have a great scent. And pink and magenta clarkia. The blue flax. The aster. And lozenge to fill in between the mature shrubs and the perennials. There are lots of choices in flowering annuals. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the garden tour, and go out and plant some native plants.
A lot of hard work to make those videos. And Susan, you'll be surprised to hear, is not a professional video maker. She has another day job, and she and her daughter worked very hard on this video. So I want to congratulate you. It was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to be so, it was a late night last night. We got it all done.
I'm sorry, but I want to thank you and Michaela for putting in the time. It was really lovely.
It was fun. It was really fun.
There's another beautiful video by Susan and her talented daughter, Michaela, on the Garden Tours YouTube channel, Bringing Back the Native Garden Tours YouTube channel. If you look under Susan Teefy, you'll see it. And you can find out more information about this garden by looking at the Garden Tours website in Castro Valley. So Susan, will you tell us something about the maintenance of the garden? Does it take a lot of time, or how does it compare to a lawn, or what can you say about it?
It doesn't. It really, I would say it's as much as you want to make it. If you don't want to do anything, the plants will all live. They'll be fine. But if you want it to look tidy, I like the paths to be swept. I like to trim off the dead branches. You can spend more time if you want to. I think I've tended to plant things that take a little bit of gardening, but they don't have to. So if it gets busy and I haven't been able to get to things for a while, it still looks fine.
Our own
Very
garden
fortunate.
was our own garden was really abandoned for a year and a half when we remodeled. And I was amazed when we came back. It was a mature garden, it was 12 years old, but it looked great when we came back after no watering, no weeding, no pruning, no deadheading, no nothing. And it was amazing how well it held up to,
Yeah, it's almost like they're meant to be here.
well, they were. So
Yeah, but I do like there are some things like after a while, the Muhlenbergia in particular, I they look kind of like a stack of hay, and so I do like to cut them back. It takes a lot of time to do that, but then they look really nice and green again. So you can garden or not garden depending on what you want it to look like. It's pretty neat.
So what are some of your favorite plants in the garden? If you were to choose like a handful of plants to say to people, oh, you might want to really try these.
I like the ceanothus, the California lilac. That's probably my favorite. Unfortunately, I think by the time the tour comes around, the flowers will be gone. But it's so pretty, and it's just full of bees and bugs. And I was really uh, entranced by the bush tit nests. The bush tit nests are just amazing. They're like a little, I don't know, a woven basket that they make, and they nest in there. It's really neat.
Susan, I want to thank you and Michaela so much for making this video. It was beautiful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So let's move on now to see how you can create the garden of your dreams with an East Bay Mud landscape rebate. It's very exciting that East Bay Mud has doubled the rebate amount if you plant a native plant garden. For a limited time, the super rebate is $2.50 a square foot, which is double the standard rebate. Plant natives, sheet mulch to remove the lawn and build healthy soil, and plant in the cool season to take advantage of the rain that will help get your garden established. You can use plants like these on the left, the beautiful California lilac, on the bottom right, California fuchsia, and on the top, the lilac verbena de la mina, to dazzle your neighbors and support pollinators. And EbMud also offers mulch and compost coupons, which are available at eastbaymud.com/mulch. As EbMud says, we may be out of the drought, but water-wise gardens are always in style. If you are watching today and haven't had a chance yet to make a donation, if you'll please support the tour. You can do it on the tour's website under Please Donate. You can Venmo a contribution to @Bringing Back the Natives. We depend upon donations to keep going, and we hope that if you've enjoyed our presentation, that you will help us to keep this event going.